Any questions for Trent, then please do so, and we'll get to them at the end.
Hello. Hi. So yeah, hi, my name is Trent Van Apps. I work on Protocol Guild full-time. This is what I spend my days thinking about. Software, power, how we fund it, and these dynamics. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me back. I really liked this event and was honored to participate in the first round, and even more so for this one. So thank you for having me in this event and this wonderful venue. So yeah, Ethereum protocol, capture risks. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Some quick definitions, or at least how I like to frame it, what it is and what it isn't. Wikipedia has a great definition, so we're going to use that one. It's a corruption of authority that occurs when a process is co-opted to serve the interests of a minor constituency. It's not necessarily value shifts over time, right? If you have an entire community that's bought into a different direction or a new architecture, this is not necessarily capture. And you can also think of it as kind of the inverse to credible neutrality. And this is a very common reference point for the Ethereum community, credible neutrality. If you're having trouble with either of these, just imagine capture as being opposed to credible neutrality, and maybe that gives you some more context. Further, what it is and what it isn't. It's rarely objectively defined. It's rarely overt power grabs, single rogue actors, single isolated events. Instead, I think it can be subjective, subtle compromises, known players, sometimes operating in legitimate processes or venues, and it's happening over time. Yeah. And the reason that protocols or standards can be targets for capture, in my opinion, is because they have value bound up within them. Venkatesh Rao has this really excellent and short, concise summary of what they are, and protocols are engineered arguments. I love this. They're an opinionated frame on the world and how to act on it. And obviously blockchains are composed of protocols that are no different. But what makes them even more unique is that they're in-flight political economies, meaning they have value bound up in them, there's decisions to be made, and there's, like I said, value contained within this system where people want to engage with it and potentially expose themselves to some of this value. So for context, we have great precedents in terms of Bitcoin. It's a longer history, a more developed political economy, and we can start to look at parallels for how that applies to Ethereum. And yeah, as mentioned, I touched on some of this in my first Protocol Guild talk, or Protocol Berg talk. I realized I forgot to hit Protocol Guild. I work on this project, and it is a collective funding mechanism for Ethereum core devs, and that's where a lot of this context comes from. Yeah, so the Bitcoin block size war, if people were around then or remember it, have heard about it, this was a really interesting example to look back to because it was, some of the community would say this was external capital coming in and trying to change the ethos of how Bitcoin operates, who has power within it, and who has decisions. And in the end, we ended up with Bitcoin Cash and this big schism. And even more recently, last week, there's this whole debate about filtering, and I think a lot of this comes down to the concentration of power and agency within this single client Bitcoin core. Which I don't think anybody wants it to be centered on a single bit of software, but that's just kind of how their community has been structured, and it's an unfortunate reality that the devs have to deal with a lot of pressure because it's treated as the de facto specification. The Linux ecosystem, again, if we want to learn from other communities, let's look at ones that are more long-lived. Linux has been around since the 90s, and it has a lot of parallels that we can look to inform Ethereum today and Ethereum in the future. So Linus is called the Benevolent Dictator for Life, BDFL. If this were in any other community, Ethereum, for example, I think the community would reject that. However, in Linux, it's kind of part of the social contract. Everybody understands that this is there's a lot of deference paid to him as an individual and a lot of weight placed on his decision. So what's captured in one context might not be captured in another. And I draw a lot from this book, Incorporating the Commons by Benjamin Birkenbein. You should all check it out. So a quick case study on Linux, Red Hat, and IBM, just to show, again, something we can hopefully learn from this long arc from one way of engaging with the commons to a very different way. So in 1993, Red Hat was founded, very positive sum open source contributors, even to the degree that in 1999, when they IPO'd, they tried to gift the Linux contributors some of the stock from the Red Hat IPO. And if you know Protocol Guild, it tries to do something similar. And so when I discovered this, I just had to laugh because there's really nothing new. We're just trying it in different contexts. Fast forward 15 years, Red Hat partners, quote unquote, with CentOS. It kind of had a struggling reputation, and Red Hat believed that they should be, helped to manage this distro. So they kind of, maybe not a hostile takeover, but they sort of coerced them into their umbrella and obligated them to do some things in exchange for funding and support. 5 years later, Red Hat gets acquired by IBM for $34 billion. This is regarded as, the poster child of success or how to create a sustainable or really successful business in the open source ecosystem. However, a year later, they deprecate CentOS, and a lot of the community is reasonably upset about this. And then 3 years later, the Red Hat decided to restrict access to some of their source code, and it's kind of breaking some of the social, technical norms that this Linux community and the distro community is built on. So this is just a quick case study about how a project within a broader software commons can change their posture over time, right? They might start out one way and then end up trying to accrue more value and power to themselves. So a little bit on the Ethereum commons. I've leaned on this frame a lot over the past few years, again, especially as it relates to Protocol Guild. And the way I define commons is that they're systems for the collective production of shared resources. And if we're, somewhat involved in the blockchain space, everybody here, you're familiar with how this applies, right? We're all building this shared software that anybody can engage with and steer the direction of. And then crucially, when we distribute the ownership to a broad public, this increases the value. And we want this to be as distributed as widely as possible. So in my view, there are three shared Ethereum resource types. There's the network, which includes the chain state, history, forks, layer 2s. Pretty broad categories, but I think, they cover all of the resources that Ethereum produces. The asset, obviously, is Ether in different contexts or taken into different forms, wrapped, restaked, or bridged. And then finally, the media, or software media. Specifications, research, software, the EVM itself, transcripts, part of the governance process, EIPs. And these three resources are, very closely interwoven with each other. It's really hard to separate them out from their originating context, but together they make what we know and love to be Ethereum. And these resources are produced under shared norms that help to protect their distributed ownership. Obviously, for the network, anybody can participate in validation, joining consensus processes, running the software. In the same way, anybody can send transactions on the network. These are really great properties to have, and they defend, again, the distributed ownership, distributed engagement with this political economy. The asset, same thing. Anybody can own it, anybody can use it, as long as it follows the rules of the EVM. And we're going to focus, obviously, the list is a little longer there, but we're going to focus on the software media as a vector to interact with these other two shared resources that the Ethereum Commons produces. So default build and governing in public, super important. Anybody can engage in this system of production. Polycentricity, where we have many centers of influence. There's not just the Ethereum Foundation. There's not just a single company that's developing this software. There are many different commercial and nonprofit entities that engage in this. A huge strength of Ethereum, open source maxis. I think this is one of the most important things that allows people to engage with the software, fork it, change it, and help to understand it the way that it's been written. Client diversity, we'll get more into this later, referencing back to Bitcoin Core, right? There's only one, so a lot of pressure builds up trying to engage diverse viewpoints in a single bit of software, whereas in Ethereum we have many clients, 5 or 6 on each layer, and this allows a diversity of opinions to be represented or explored in these different software code bases. And then finally, checks and balances. Teams release software, validators decide if they want to run it. You know, same as Bitcoin, but it's worth mentioning here that there is a check and balance between these different resource production pathways. That was supposed to be, it was supposed to be an image of a recent article from the block talking about the concentration of Bitcoin ownership. You know, the strategy is this company that's using this kind of leverage strategy to accumulate more and more Bitcoin. And the article was about how this is risky for if central banks want to look at owning Bitcoin. If you have one entity using this risky leverage trade to own 3% of the network asset, you know, maybe this should give them pause. But hopefully my description suffices instead of that image. So now we get into the next part of this where we're going to look at some examples and some potential risks moving forward and a disclaimer to kick it off. Not saying that any of the projects featured here have malicious designs or are bad actors now or in the future. Please don't take a photo out of context and try to flame me on Twitter or something. So, Ethereum case studies, specifically about capture. We all know the 2016 DAO hack and the resolution. At the time, it was 15% of supply, about 150 million at the time of the hack. This was a huge controversy and I think an important formative event for the Ethereum community, which we're kind of still dealing with the after effects today. Specifically as it relates to the next example. There was a company, Parity, at the time that was engaged in the Ethereum ecosystem. They had a multi-sig that had some issues on chain, some compromises where funds were locked. But specifically, I'm concerned with the one that the second one that happened, and the EIP 999 that followed up to try and restore those lost funds. At that time, it was 0.5% of the total ETH supply, about 154 million, and 280 million at the time of the EIP. So, final example is ProgPow. It took place over a couple of years. And when it was first introduced, proof-of-work miners were making $13 million a day in block reward, roughly. So I hope you picked up what I'm trying to get across is that concentrated capital and political access can be potential capture vectors. So we'll go through a couple different examples. Again, looking at things over time, trends, not isolated incidents, as to where future network risks can come, right? If you are a large capital entity that's engaged somewhere on the network or somewhere with the asset, how does that expose the broader Ethereum commons to some form of capture risk? So the staking ecosystem started off in December 2020 with the launch of the Beacon chain, and now we've seen a pretty healthy distribution as more actors, more companies start up around it, more staking as a service providers start to build businesses around this. So this is, I would say, a pretty healthy trend. Layer 2s, right? Ethereum has the roll-up-centric roadmap. This is a crucial part of how we're scaling, getting execution to as many people as possible. However, it's not good if there's just one or two, and it's good to see more diversity increasing. However, we'd love to always have more. When you have a distribution of not just ETH, but value in many different forms, tokens that are bridging, you're distributing the risk of any single one of these becoming, quote unquote, too big to fail. And that's what we want to avoid. More recently, ETFs were approved last year for Ether, the asset, and very quickly they saw quite a bit of adoption. And in the last week, we've seen an uptick in the inflows to these products, which is great. I love that the world is waking up to what we're building. It's wonderful to see. However, we should think long-term about potential risks as it comes to, or as it relates to, TradFi starting to sniff around the edges of what we're building here. Exciting, but should also give us pause. And then there's the other potential of these ETFs becoming staked. Does this make the problem worse? We should always just kind of consider this in a long-term perspective, how these entities are starting to engage with the asset itself. Another category, LSTs. The yellow is Lido. There's pretty vociferous debate over the years about the role of Lido as an asset provider in the sense of like staked ETH. It has very wide usage across a lot of DeFi. However, some parts of the core Ethereum community have been radically against this and call it a form of centralization. I'm not going to make a decision one way or the other or try to tell you what side of the fence you should be on, but it's clear that this is a large actor, large capital actor that's proximate to Ethereum governance, and it's just something to be aware of and think about long term. Final example is block builders, right? So we had proof of work for many years up until the merge. I would say a pretty healthy distribution, and it was increasing. And then the system reset. We had the merge, we moved to proof of stake, and what came out of that is PBS, proposer builder separation. And you can see it very clearly in the diagram there where we shift into this. And over the last few years, it kind of settled into this duopoly where there were two actors that were producing, I think, about 80% of all transactions or all blocks. Not great. However, in the corner, you can still see that just because something is, there's maybe a stable equilibrium, that doesn't mean that changes can occur. So BuilderNet was recently introduced by the Flashbots team, and you can see it in the top right of the diagram where it's starting to emerge as maybe a disruption to this equilibrium in the block building space. So let's look forward. Different capture risks that we can maybe anticipate and track in the near and medium term future. So we just went over a bunch of capital concentration questions. I mean, capital and network are intertwined in a sense for blockchain networks, especially proof of stake ones. Culturally, can we avoid contributor homogeneity? I'm starting to see more and more babies appear at conferences. So the question is, as the people that started, they got into Ethereum or these communities when they were younger, and now they're growing their families, which is wonderful to see. Will we just kind of age everybody up and we end up all kind of in the same space in these conferences in 30 years? Or are we going to be able to make people excited about what we're building, bringing in the next generation of people to be excited about these protocols and help us steward them? Regulatory, again in quotes, Layer 2 Beat has a ton of weight placed on it in terms of how it evaluates Layer 2s and keeps them accountable. However, it engages in a lot of governance activities, whether it's as a steward, a delegate, or helping them make funding decisions. And sometimes they receive funding from these Layer 2s. I have a lot of respect for the individuals at L2 Beat, and I know that they're quality people, but over time, values do shift, and it's a question of, if we look back to the financial crisis, some of the ratings agencies were fully compromised and not actually capable of executing on what ostensibly their role was, which was to be a check on the power of some of these companies. External regulatory constraints. Again, as Ethereum grows, the outside world gets interested in what we're doing. So Tornado Cash had a saga over the last few years. It's slowly improving. However, you should donate to Roman Storm. His trial is coming up in July. Politically, L2s are the site of monetization or productization of block space. They're the user, we can call them the user-facing producers of block space or user experience. And it's a question of, do they represent the values of Ethereum, or how much do they diverge there? Finally, all core devs growing pains. How can we scale processes without fracturing rough consensus? Because the more people who are engaged in this governance process, the harder it's going to be to actually get people to agree on what path we should take moving forward. I'm happy to say that this has made significant progress. Here's a rough snapshot of mainnet in 2015. This is probably wrong in some ways, so if you actually know the specific composition, please come to me after and I'll fix it. But right, we had the Ethereum Foundation as the major steward of this software, the clients that are running mainnet. Today, I'm happy to say that it's much more diverse. Again, mentioned earlier, polycentricity, the idea of client diversity is represented really well here. We have, again, 5 or 6 clients on each layer, and they each have independent teams. They're building sustainable long-term businesses, and this is a great thing to have. Again, you can have many different perspectives on protocol changes represented here, and this is a very good thing to have. So I'm happy that Ethereum has this as an undergirding to how we engage with protocol changes and protocol stewardship. So how can we reduce capture risk moving forward? We should freeze the protocol today. Unfortunately, not possible. We still have a lot to do in terms of scaling, both PeerDAS, scaling the L1. There's a lot that still needs to happen, not just scaling, but also maybe in protocol privacy, different features that we need to do to harden and maintain our core values. We should continue to distribute power, bring people into the governance process. As I mentioned previously, track trends over isolated incidents, and forecast adversarial futures. How can we prevent ideological or cultural capture, or having it be centered on a particular frame of the world? And then finally, recognize that funding flows are a political lever. There's a bit of a paradox here where too much capital in a particular form, unconstrained form, is really bad because it might skew incentives or give large capital actors a voice in protocol governance in a way that they wouldn't otherwise have. However, the paradox on the other side is that if core devs or protocol stewards are undercompensated or under-resourced relative to the broader market, it makes it more easy to coerce their actions or the software that they write. So these are two sides of the same coin, and I think there might be a happy medium. This is a project that I work on, the last slide, and then we can get to questions. Protocol Guild, like I said, is a collective funding mechanism for core contributors, and I've been working on it since 2021, and it's proven to be an exciting construction in terms of providing capital, large-scale capital, to all of the core contributors. Today we fund about 200 core developers, and it does it in a way that goes directly to the individuals and hopefully constrains the overt, or it's an ultimate check on how capital actors might engage with core development and return some of that agency to the individuals. So if you're curious about Protocol Guild, come find me after or look it up online. We've got a bunch of talks that go into more detail. But thank you for listening, and thank you again to the organizers for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Trent. Thank you, Trent. We got a few minutes for questions, so we'll see how many we can do. Let's take the first one here. Who's the biggest threat to Ethereum L1?
Like a single person? I don't know.
Maybe a single entity or anything. I don't know. I guess it's hard.
Well, I mean, I kind of just went over all of them, and it's hard to say whether one of them is more risky than the other. And I did give that big disclaimer that says, they're all good people today. In the future, somebody might get acquired, the team changes, the culture changes, and that's really what we should watch out for. It's not like there's somebody at the door knocking, busting it down. It's probably not going to be an obvious antagonist. That's kind of what I was trying to get across here.
Without a BDFL, is Ethereum guided by a kind, gentle, lifelong oligarchy in the nicest way possible?
That's interesting. I mean, if you ask me without this question, I would say Ethereum and most blockchain systems are a technocracy. but maybe there's an oligarchy behind the technocracy. Depends on how you frame it, but yeah, I guess oligarchy refers to like the source of funding and these larger commercial entities that have power. I would say it's pretty balanced today, so that's actually, it's a positive thing for now.
Okay, we'll go for one last question here. Some of the most powerful projects on Ethereum are directly controlled by people whose agenda is US economic supremacy. How would you relate that to Ethereum capture risk?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on this. TradFi and the legacy financial system is kind of waking up, especially with the proliferation of stable coins, USDC, Tether. People are starting to see that there's a lot of opportunity to make money here. And in doing so, we have to be careful to not get steamrolled as this global adoption takes place. Oh, it's gone.
Yeah, I marked this as answered. Yeah, we don't have much more time. We have a lot more.
I'll try to go through the rest of these because I can't really read them now, but maybe answer them on the. I put out a tweet earlier, and I'll go through them. But yeah, thank you all.
You can also catch Trent right now, right after this, and
Oh
ask
yeah.